Translate this or leave. The king's voice crashed through the marble hall like a bolt of iron thunder. That command, flung at me, Marina, a maid whose only weapons were trembling hands and a tongue used to murmuring prayers, made the crystal chandeliers quiver overhead. I stood before King Aurelian, clutching a parchment seal with his own crimson crest, my flower-stained apron absurdly out of place among velvet capes and jeweled collars. One mistake, I knew, and my body would hang from the northern tower before dawn. Picture the scene, a throne of hammered gold raised on 3 black granite steps, courtiers fanning themselves with ostrich plumes while betting in hushed tones on how quickly I would faint. Torches hissed in bronze sconces, their flames bending as if they, too, feared the man seated beneath the lion-carved canopy. Aurelian's gauntlet fist drummed the armrest, each thud a promise of punishment. I had been dragged from the kitchens because word had spread that I, of all people, could decipher a forbidden tongue. It was true. My grandmother, a half-blind scholar sent into exile for reading the wrong books, had taught me languages beneath a leaky roof lit by guttering candles. "Words are keys, Marina," she would whisper. "Someday you'll unlock a door no one else dares touch." I'd never imagined that door would open in the king's own audience chamber. The chamberlain, Lord Vespasian, elegant as a dagger, leaned close enough for me to smell cloves on his breath. "Translate perfectly," he hissed, "or we'll find out whether maids bounce when they fall." Behind him, silk-clad ladies murmured, their jewels clicking like mocking laughter. Yet inside my chest, a spark flared. The line of the parchment seal was not quite straight. Someone else had tampered with the document after the king signed it. When I cracked the wax, the hall inhaled as one creature. I scanned the first lines, and my blood iced over. The text ordered 3 legions to march north at dawn, and included an added clause, in fresh ink, demanding that the pregnant queen be executed before the troops return. If I spoke every word aloud, the realm would explode in civil war, and the king himself, ignorant of the addition, would be branded a tyrant who murdered his own heir. Someone wanted me to be the fuse. My pulse thundered in my ears. If I read the document truthfully, the courtiers would revolt, and I would die. If I lied, Lord Vespasian would slit my throat for treason. Above the sea of heads, I caught the queen's gaze. She sat pale in a velvet gallery, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other lifted in the faintest gesture, pleading for silence. "What would you do standing where I stood, with a kingdom balanced on the tip of your tongue?" I remembered another of grandmother's lessons. A woman who knows the truth can shake thrones, if she dares speak on her own terms. The spark became a flame. I lifted the parchment high enough for all to see. My voice, surprisingly steady, rang out. "Your Majesty," the words before me contained grave matters of state. Vespasian's lip curled. He expected victory. The king leaned forward, eager to hear his power confirmed. But I chose a third path. "I will translate," I declared. "Yet first I must verify the authenticity of this royal seal. It appears," I let the silence stretch, "to bear 2 impressions, not one." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The king's brows knitted. I could almost feel the fate of every soul in that hall, pivoting on the hinge of my next sentence. And so, instead of speaking the betrayal inked by a traitor's hand, I spoke the truth that mattered most. The document had been altered. Murmurs rose like a coming storm. Aurelian's eyes flashed with something colder than steel, not at me, but at the serpents he suddenly realized were coiled beside his throne. In that instant, I understood. My voice had become the match, yet I could choose what to ignite. The next words I formed would decide whether crowns toppled or tyrants fell. I drew a breath, meeting the king's gaze without flinching. What happened after that? How Maid silenced the most powerful man in the realm and rewrote the destiny of a nation begins with the single, deliberate word I spoke next. The single, deliberate word I spoke was forged. It rippled through the throne room like a stone hurled into still water. First a hush, then a roar of overlapping outrage. Robes rustled, steel chimed as guards shifted stance, and somewhere high above, a pigeon startled from the rafters, wing beats drumming panic into the vaulted ceiling. I kept my chin lifted, parchment trembling only a hair. "Majesty," I continued slow and clear, "the seal bears 2 impressions. One is yours, deep, clean, pressed while the wax was hot. The other," I angled the scroll so the nearest nobles could see the faint double ring, "was stamped later, with colder wax and a lighter hand. Someone has laced treason into your command." King Aurelian's knuckles whitened around the armrest. "Who?" he growled. Echoes bit back at him from the marble walls. In that instant, every courtier tried to look both outraged and ignorant. Heads swiveled, fingers fluttered to throats, eyes darted like trapped sparrows. But Lord Vespasian, too certain of his own perfection, let the corner of his mouth twitch. Barely a tremor, yet I caught it. So did the queen. Her gaze, sharp as tempered glass, flicked to him and back to me, a silent thread of understanding. The king rose. Even half standing, he towered. "Bring the royal verifier," he barked. "We shall test the seal at once." Servants scurried. While they fetched reagents and magnifiers, I forced myself to breathe. My gamble had bought minutes, maybe less, but minutes could alter destinies. I scanned the crowd until I found a friendly face. Brother Salvius, the palace librarian, hovering near a column with ink-stained fingers clasped like a penitent's. Years ago, he had slipped me scraps of forbidden grammar in exchange for smuggled honey cakes. Now I mouthed one word, help, and tilted the scroll an inch. He read the hidden clause at a glance, his eyes widened, then narrowed with scholar's fury. He faded into the shadows. I trusted he would not stay idle. Meanwhile, the verifier arrived, a stooped man in spectacles, carrying a velvet tray of chemicals and brushes. He bowed, took the parchment from my hands, and bent beneath a lamp. Silence pooled thick and suffocating while he worked, dusting, breathing on wax, holding it to the light. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer inside my ribs. At last he straightened. "Her Majesty's denunciation is accurate," he announced in a voice brittle as old parchment. "The seal has been struck twice." A collective gasp. A lady swooned into her companion's arms. The verifier added, "Further, the ink of the hidden clause is 3 days fresher than the body text." He laid the scroll on the tray like a corpse. "This is indeed a forgery." Aurelian's rage snapped outward. "Vespasian," he thundered. "You alone carried my orders to the scribe." The Lord bowed with glacial grace. "Your grace, I delivered them sealed and whole. Any tampering occurred after they left my custody." His eyes grazed me, no longer triumphant, now calculating. Perhaps the maid sought to elevate herself with false accusations. The accusation struck hard. Murmurs thickened. Doubt dripped into the room like poison. I opened my mouth, but another voice cut across the floor. "Perhaps," the queen said, rising, "we might ask why Lord Vespasian stored the royal sigil in his private chambers last night." She placed a hand on her belly, calm though her words were blades. I passed his door on the way to chapel and saw the lock ajar. Gasps again. Vespasian's face drained of color, then flushed dark red. A slander. Before he could weave more silk around his guilt, Brother Salvius stepped from the column clutching a ledger. "Majesty," he called. "The ink used on the added clause is storm violet, ground only in the scriptorium. 2 vials are missing from inventory, signed out under Lord Vespasian's seal." He held up the book. The king motioned a guard to seize it. Pages flapped like frightened doves as evidence changed hands. For the first time, Vespasian's composure cracked. "This is a conspiracy of servants," he spat. "An alliance of broom pushers and dusty scribes." I felt heat crawl into my cheeks, not of shame but of resolve. "Servants," I said, stepping forward, "keep the halls shining, the stoves burning, the ledgers honest. Without us, your silks rot, your feasts spoil, your lies remain uncopied." My voice rose so even the furthest balcony heard. "Yes, we are brooms and dust, but together dust can choke a serpent." A ripple of approval, soft yet undeniable, ran through the lesser ranks standing along the walls. Pages, grooms, scullery maids. Power shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough for the crown to feel its weight move. Aurelian lifted a hand. The hall stilled. "Lord Vespasian," he said, voice icy, "you will be confined until a full inquiry concludes. Should you be found guilty, the penalty is death." 2 armored guards stepped in. Vespasian's jaw worked soundlessly. Then he fixed me with a glare that promised future horrors. But as he was led away, I caught his whisper, just for me. "The North will burn, Maid. With or without my ink." A chill clawed my spine. The forged clause was more than a bid for power. It was a distraction. Somewhere beyond the palace, 3 legions still prepared to march at dawn, obeying an order that might plunge the kingdom into war. Removing one traitor would not halt the blades already in motion. I bowed to the king, forcing my voice steady. "Majesty, the document names commanders who depart before sunrise. If they ride with false directives, the realm bleeds." The throne room, moments ago an arena of accusation, became a council of emergency. Aurelian glanced to the queen, then to me. "You uncovered the deceit," he said. "Can you unravel it?" My answer, though it terrified me, was the only path left. "Grant me authority to travel with your standard," I said, "and I will ride tonight to intercept the legions. I know the code in which these orders are written. I can prove the truth before swords are drawn." The king studied me, just a kitchen maid with ink-stained fingertips. Then he took off his signet ring, heavy gold glinting, and placed it in my palm. "Go," he commanded. "Silence this treachery as you silenced me." The hall erupted in clamor as plans were barked, messengers dispatched, torches lit for a night ride. And I, Marina the maid, felt the cold circle of royal authority bite into my skin. Ahead lay rain-slick roads, hostile commanders, and a dawn that could break crimson with war or clear with peace, depending on how quickly I could make the truth gallop. I turned toward the doors, heart hammering like hooves already on the stone. The match had been struck. Now the fire had to run faster than the fuse. What awaited beyond the palace gates would test not just my voice, but my courage, my cunning, and the fragile alliance I had sparked in a room of enemies. And somewhere in the shadows behind me, Lord Vespasian's threat coiled like smoke, promising that the worst was yet to come. Rain lashed the palace courtyard as I swung into the saddle of a coal-black destrier far too grand for a kitchen maid. Yet the king's signet ring, now strung on a crimson cord around my neck, overrode every protest. Sir Roderick, captain of the Royal Guard, pressed a travel packet into my hand, dried meat, a map inked with crimson routes, and a dagger honed to a whisper-thin edge. "Ride hard, Lady Interpreter," he said, refusing to call me maid. "At Dawn's Hollow you'll find the Vanguard Legion. Convince them before sunrise, or steel will speak louder than truth." We thundered through the city gates beneath a moon veiled by storm clouds. Cobblestones flashed like wet obsidian, gutters spat foam. Behind me rode 2 guards for protection, and perhaps to see whether the miracle maid could perform a second wonder. My cloak snapped like a banner, and for the first time in my life the wind smelled not of bread ovens but of iron and night-blooming fear. Hours blurred into hoofbeats. By the time the eastern horizon bruised violet, we crested a ridge overlooking Dawn's Hollow, a narrow valley pinched between black pines and jagged limestone. Torches glimmer below, rows of tents, watchfires, and the silver gleam of spearheads catching the first hints of dawn. Trumpets brayed reveille. 3,000 men stirred like a single beast. Too late, I thought. Marching orders usually sounded at first light. We galloped down the switchback trail and reined up before the command pavilion. Captain Armand, a broad-shouldered veteran with a scar slicing one eyebrow, strode out. His expression soured at my mud-spattered dress. "State your business." I swung down, showed him the signet. "Royal authority. The orders you carry are forged." Armand's eyes flicked to the ring, then to the guards. "Forged, you say?" I saw Lord Vespasian's countersign myself. "He stands accused of treason," I shot back. "Let me see the parchment." Reluctance warred with duty. Finally, he beckoned me inside. The command table was littered with map weights and sealed tubes. Armand broke one open, withdrawing a scroll identical to the one I had exposed. Except this seal bore only a single, perfect impression. My heart thudded. The traitors had learned from their mistake. I skimmed the Latin-coded text, "Advance north, secure the queen and heir for protective custody." Innocuous words, until you knew the cipher behind protective custody meant termination upon transport. Worse, a footnote in invisible gall ink surfaced under heat from a nearby brazier. Upon success, torch the capital stables as signal. They planned to cloak the royal murder beneath the chaos of fire. I drew a breath, forced calm. "Captain, this scroll carries a hidden layer. Hold it to the flame." He did, and the lethal claws surfaced like a bruise. A curse hissed through his teeth. "By the saints! Who tampered with the king's word?" "Lord Vespasian, but he is only the blade, not the hand." I tapped the margin where a faint sigil, a knotted serpent, marked the gall ink. Grandmother's lessons flooded back. The glyph of Prince Magnus, Aurelian's exiled cousin, rumored dead these 10 years. My pulse spiked. Someone thought buried, now plots to take both crown and heir. Armand's jaw clenched. "If Magnus rides with mercenaries, we'll need every sword in the kingdom." He strode to the tent flap, but a horn blast outside cut him short. We burst into daylight to find the camp's outer pickets overrun. Figures in slate-gray cloaks, mercenary scouts, had breached the perimeter. Arrows hissed. One tore a guard from his saddle. Chaos erupted. Armand bellowed orders. I ducked beneath a flying spear and seized a fallen crossbow. Instinct, not training, guided my aim. The bolt fell to cloaked raider inches from the powder kegs. Smoke stung my eyes. Somewhere a war horn shrieked the signal to march, exactly what the traitors wanted. A shadow loomed, a mercenary captain on a dun stallion, crescent blade raised. I braced for death, then remembered the ring. I ripped it free, holding it high so gold flashed in the smoky dawn. By the king's seal, stand down, I cried. The mercenary hesitated, but another arrow whistled toward my throat. Armand tackled me to the ground. The shaft thudded into a tent pole. He hauled me up, eyes blazing. They're not here to scare us, they're here to silence you. We staggered toward the standards, trying to rally the legion before confusion turned to rout. Yet through the clamor, I caught a glimpse of a gray-cloaked rider racing away, clutching a torch and a pouch of pitch, the signal fire meant for the capital stables. If he reached the ridge, flames would crown the sky, and Magnus' hidden army would sweep in under the guise of royal command. Captain, I shouted above the din, if that torch is lit, the city will burn and the queen will die. Armand followed my gaze, face hardening. Then we ride. He whistled for fresh mounts, thrust a curved cavalry saber into my hands. Can you use it? I can learn before we reach him, I answered, though the weight felt alien. No time for fear. We vaulted onto horses slick with sweat. The ridge path twisted like a serpent's spine, loose stones rattling under hoofs. Wind tore at my hood, every muscle screamed. The torchbearer, a silhouette against the brightening sky, was half a furlong ahead, sparks streaming from his brand. Closer, closer. I could almost taste smoke. Then my mount stumbled. I lurched, clinging to the mane. The saber flew from my grasp, skittering down the slope. Ahead, the traitor raised his arm, flame flaring wide, ready to cast the kingdom into chaos with a single blaze. I had nothing but the ring, my voice, and one desperate idea. I cupped my hands to my mouth and unleashed the only weapon left, the forbidden tongue my grandmother taught me, the battle cry of the ancient northern tribes, words that, legend said, could shatter courage itself. The valley echoed with a guttural chant. The torchbearer's arm faltered mid-arc. His stallion reared, screaming. For one heartbeat, the fire wavered between heaven and earth, then slipped from his grasp, tumbling into the ravine below. A hiss, a puff of sparks, extinguished. Relief flashed too soon. The rider wheeled, bow already knocked, arrow aimed at my heart. I had no sword, no shield. Only one last breath and the memory of my grandmother's final lesson. Sometimes the truth must be paid for with blood. The arrow flew. Everything slowed, hooves, heartbeat, even the sunrise. And I wondered, as the steel point blurred toward my chest, whether I had bought the realm's dawn at the cost of my own. The arrow never reached me. A blur of silver intercepted the shaft in mid-flight. Sir Roderick's blade swung with impossible precision as his horse skidded between me and death. The arrow split, fragments spinning harmlessly into the scrub. Roderick's eyes, ice over embers, locked on the traitor. No one slaughters the realm's last hope on my watch, he rasped. We spurred forward as one. The torchbearer wheeled again, spurring his stallion toward a knife-edge ledge that overlooked both valley and highway. If he could not ignite the city, he would still send a beacon the legions below could see, a column of smoke that men attack. Wind howled, keening through pines like grieving spirits. My horse, lathered and trembling, fought for footing on the narrowing spine of rock. Loose gravel clattered into the chasm. Every heartbeat, the ledge crumbled beneath hoofs, as though the mountain itself sided with treachery. Ahead, the traitor dismounted and flung a clay firepot against a jutting boulder. It shattered, oil gushed, eager for spark. He struck flint to steel, once, twice, showers of sparks skittering over slick stone. Roderick raised his sword to charge, but I yanked his rein. If the blade hits the oil, it will blaze, I shouted. We need him alive and the fire dead. I slid from my saddle, boots skidding. The signet ring thumped against my sternum, royal weight demanding courage. I advanced, palms open, speaking in the traitor's own tongue, the mercenary dialect of the border marches. Your name matters still, I called above the wind. Yield, and the king may show mercy. He laughed, hollow as bones. Mercy is a myth sold by the powerful to keep the weak tame. He scraped flint again. A spark landed, fizzled, landed again. One lick of orange flared, instantly smothered by rain. He cursed and drew a hunting knife. Sir Roderick edged left, blade low, trying to flank him without spooking the flame. I mirrored right, heart hammering. This coup ends tonight, I said, switching to high court speech so each word rang clear for the valley ranks below. Lay down that steel and face judgment under the crown's law, or tumble into legend as a coward who burned in his own treachery. The torchbearer's grin stretched wolf-wide. Legend cares little for truth, only for spectacle. He hurled his knife, not at us, but at the clay oil pool. Shards burst, releasing a fresh gush of fuel. Then, with suicidal resolve, he seized the broken torch, struck it once, twice. Flame bloomed, devil blue under the oil's slick sheen. A pillar of fire whooshed skyward. Alarm horns brayed from the camp. Soldiers formed ranks, unsure whether to stand or charge. In the distance, other watchfires flared in answering code, mercurial orange flickers spelling commands I could not read. I lunged, snatching a wet cloak from the ground, slamming it over the blaze. Heat seared my palms, steam spurted. But the oil kept feeding the tongue of flame, hungry, rising. Roderick dropped beside me, shoveling dirt with his gauntlets. The traitor darted past, aiming to dash for the cliff's edge, perhaps to leap, perhaps to rally another signal farther on. I caught his ankle. He kicked. Pain spiked up my arm, but I held, twisting. The signet cord snapped. The ring skittered toward the cliff. A gasp tore from my throat. Without that proof of authority, my voice would weigh less than ash in the coming council. Roderick saw it tumble and dove, sword abandoned, sliding on his belly to snag the ring just before it vanished into the abyss. He tossed it back, eyes alight with fierce triumph. "Guard it better," he barked, even as a flaming ember landed on his cloak. I stamped the spark out. Behind us, hooves thundered. Captain Armand and a score of cavalry burst onto the ridge, banners snapping. In one sweep, they encircled the traitor. He dropped to his knees, coughing smoke, eyes wild. Armand dismounted, yanked back the hood. My breath froze. The man was barely more than a boy, 17, perhaps 18, cheeks still soft but eyes hardened by promises older than his years. Branded on his neck was the serpent sigil of Prince Magnus. "Where is Magnus mustering?" Armand demanded. The boy spat blood-tinged rain. "Everywhere your king is blind." Armand backhanded him. "Answer or hang." I touched the captain's arm. "Fear will not loosen a tongue sworn to die. Show him another future." Armand grimaced but stepped back. I knelt, the signet ring glittering between us like a question. "Your name?" "Silas," he muttered. Rain streaked soot down his face. "Silas," I repeated softer. "Your prince sends children to die for a throne he never earned. Help us stop the slaughter, and you can choose a life beyond this ledge." Silas laughed, a brittle sound that cracked midway. "Life? The moment I speak, Magnus will carve my heart out, even if he must cross death to do it." A tremor shook the ridge. Pebbles skidded. Below, the legion shifted, officers struggling to parse the conflicting signals. We had minutes, maybe less, before discipline snapped. I weighed choices. Lies would fail, threats too. So I offered truth. "Listen," I said, voice dropping. I was a maid, overlooked, disposable. Yet tonight I stood in the throne room and made the king listen. Power isn't born. It's taken by daring to speak where silence is demanded. Help us now, and I will speak for you. Silas's gaze darted from the encircling blades to my smoke-blackened hands. Rain hammered harder, drumming like impatient war drums. Finally, he exhaled. "Magnus rides with 2,000 cells words under the banner of the Grey Scythe. They camp at Fallen Stone Pass, 3 days west, waiting for the signal fires to march on the capital while the legions are pulled north." Armand swore. "If they strike from the west while the city gates are half-guarded, it will fall from within," I finished. The forged orders were only phase 1. A trumpet blast below signaled urgency, messengers galloping up the switchback. "No time." I rose, turning to Armand. "We split forces. Send riders to the king with this confession." I pressed the serpent-marked hood into the captain's hands. "Hold the legion here under sealed orders from the queen herself. Fortify Dawn's Hollow. Expect assault from the west." Sir Roderick and I will cut south cross country, shortest path to Fallen Stone Pass. If we can disrupt Magnus' vanguard before they break camp, we buy the crown time to rally. Armand looked from me, Mudcake trembling, to the smoking oil pool, then to Silas. In those seconds a kitchen maid became field marshal. He saluted. May the saints guide your path, Lady Marina. We moved fast. Roderick secured 2 fresh mounts while I bound Silas's wrists, loosely. You ride with us, I told him. If Magnus truly kills deserters, your safest place is at my side. Thunder rolled as we plunged into the timberline, leaving Armand's banners to untangle the morning's chaos. Each stride of my horse jarred bruises on bruises, but urgency burned like fever. Somewhere beyond these rain-soaked peaks, an exiled prince marshaled steel and fire, and the only wall between his hunger and the throne was a maid, a disillusioned boy, and a knight whose blade had already tasted lightning. The mountain trail forked south into mist. I glanced back once. Dawn's hollow, torches flickering like watchful eyes, grew smaller, then vanished behind sheets of rain. Ahead awaited Fallen Stone Pass, where myth said kingships were broken on anvils of betrayal. And so we rode, racing not just clouds but the story itself, trying to reach the next page before Magnus could write it in blood. We reached Fallen Stone Pass beneath a moon the color of hammered steel. The trail funneled into a natural gate, 2 sheer cliffs leaning like jaws ready to snap. Beyond, lanterns bobbed through the pines. Magnus' camp, a grid of tents stitched from gray sailcloth, chimneys coughing sparks into the night. Even at a distance we heard iron striking whetstone, boots crunching frost, captains barking schedules meant for dawn's bloodletting. Sir Roderick surveyed the choke point. 1 pass, 1 road, he muttered. 1,000 men could hold it, but a single rock slide could seal it. His gauntlet traced the overhanging ledge riddled with fracture lines. We collapsed that shelf. Magnus will need days to carve a new path. Days the king can use, I agreed, tightening my borrowed riding gloves. Yet collapsing a mountain required powder, wedges, or magic we did not possess. We needed subtler tools. My gaze drifted to Silas, wrists bound by a knotted cord, yet riding beside us without protest. Your prince values spectacle. Does he hold nightly councils? Silas nodded once. At the Warforge, a smithy tent near the central fire. He preaches over the anvil, so every spark crowns his words. His voice wavered between pride and fear. Tonight he will unveil the serpent banner, then order the march. Then we must cut the serpent's tongue before it hisses, Roderick said. He swung down, untied his cloak, and slashed a strip wide enough to fashion 3 gray hood masks. Blend and strike. I slipped the cloth around my face, heart-rattling ribs. The signet ring I hid beneath my tunic. If discovered, its glint would damn me. Roderick passed Silas a mask, but the boy hesitated. If I'm seen near you, I'm dead. You're dead if Magnus wins, I countered. Help us silence him, and the crown will erase your brand. I touched the serpent's scar, then offered my dagger. Your choice. Silas swallowed, took the dagger, and tied the mask. Warforge stands at camp's heart. Forge fire never sleeps. Follow the sparks. We ghosted down the goat path, stones slick with night frost. At the perimeter, sentries in dull mail challenged us in the Marcher dialect. Silas answered with soldier slang about late patrol and cold ale. They waved us through. Inside, camp stench, pitch, sweat, boiled barley, thick in the air. We stitched ourselves into streams of footmen hauling barrels, scribes carrying scroll crates, smiths rolling whetstones. No one spared a second glance at 3 more gray hoods. The Warforge rose ahead, a pavilion of black sailcloth anchored over an anvil taller than a man. Bellows pumped, feeding a rectangular hearth that burned with eerie blue powder. Around it gathered officers in cloaks trimmed with silver thread, 40, perhaps 50. At their center, Prince Magnus himself, lean, sharp-featured, hair-plaited with wolf teeth. He held a gauntlet of molten steel with tongs, letting orange rivulets drip like blood into a ceremonial bowl. His voice sliced the murmur. By dawn's break, the capital will choke on its own smoke. Today we reclaim what my brother stole. The bowl hissed as he quenched the steel, steam veiling his face. When the serpent banner rises, no one will remember Aurelian, only Magnus the restorer. A roar answered him, blades slammed on shields. My stomach lurched. This was belief, not mere greed. Roderick's hand brushed his sword hilt, but 50 swords against one would end in seconds. We needed confusion, a spark of fear fierce enough to scatter loyalty. I scanned the forge. Barrels of pitch, crates of black powder charges stamped with mine sigils, explosives for blasting through the pass. Collapse from the inside. I leaned toward Roderick. If we ignite those crates, the slide you wanted will happen over their heads. Too risky, he breathed. One spark and we roast with them. But Silas's eyes brightened. Recognition. Powder inside is damp, needs primer flasks kept in the supply cart. He pointed subtly to a wagon half hidden behind hides. Break the primer, light the main charge, run like demons. Time spiraled tight. Magnus raised the quenched gauntlet high. Attendants unfurled a banner, gray serpent on crimson field. Soldiers knelt as if before an altar. I felt the entire valley lean toward war. Roderick slid me a single flint steel striker. You and Silas handle the cart. I'll cover your retreat and... No, I cut in. You fell the shelf. Take 3 primer flasks, plant them in the cracks above the pass. I'll light the cart. Roderick met my gaze, measured my resolve, then nodded once, fierce and proud. He and Silas melted into the crowd. I drifted to the wagon, nerves singing. Each step echoed grandmother's lesson. Words unlock doors, but fire melts chains. I sliced the lashings, pried the tarp, revealing 6 clay bottles capped with wax. I pocketed one for Roderick, smashed another against powder kegs, dousing them in volatile resin. Magnus intoned a final oath. His officers drew swords to swear fealty. I struck flint. The spark glided, kissed resin. Fire crawled like orange lace. I turned, walking not running, counting heartbeats to keep panic from betraying me. 10, 11. A shriek, fire, torches whipped, banners fell. I sprinted, hood flaring. Behind me, powder erupted, first a cough, then a thunderclap that blew the forge tent sky high, scattering embers across canvas roofs. Chaos detonated. Up on the cliff, 3 white blooms flared, the primers Roderick had placed. A heartbeat later, the mountain roared. Stone slabs avalanched, pulverizing the supply wagons, sealing the mouth of the pass beneath a rolling storm of dust and shattered pine. Soldiers fled in every direction, swallowed by debris fog. I staggered through choking grit until a hand yanked me behind an upturned cart. Roderick, coughing, Silas beside him, both caked in gray slate. Pass is buried, the night rasped. Magnus! I peered through swirling dust. The prince crawled from wreckage, hair singed, serpent banner half burned in his grip. His eyes locked on mine, recognition spearing across the chaos. He screeched a command. Archers knocked arrows despite the rubble. Roderick hauled me onto a horse whose eyes rolled white. Ride, he barked. Silas leaped behind me. Hooves hammered shattered stone as arrows hissed past. One glanced off my stirrup, another lodged in Silas's shoulder. He clenched his teeth, refusing to fall. We burst from the ruin into open forest. Behind us, fallen stone pass smoldered, the sealed throat choking Magnus' ambitions. Yet pursuit thundered after us. The exiled prince would not yield while breath remained. And so the chase began, through black pines and moonlit ravines, 3 fugitives against a vengeful army, racing to reach the capital with proof of treason and a kingdom's last fragile hope. Night swallowed the forest as we pounded south, branches whipping like cords across our faces. Sir Roderick led. I clung behind him, Silas's blood warming my sleeve around the arrow still lodged in his shoulder. Far off, Magnus' trumpets kept time with our hearts, proof the hunt had only paused. When moonlight failed, we walked, leading exhausted horses over roots slick with moss. Steam drifted from their nostrils, mixing with ground fog that filled hollows like spilled milk. Silas wavered, so I knotted cloth above the wound and snapped the arrow's shaft. He hissed but managed a crooked smile. If I die, Magnus wins a little. I'll stay alive out of spite. At dawn we reached Briarwater Ford. The rope bridge there hung half-burned. The guardhouse beyond was ashes. Roderick swore. He outflanked us. I pointed upstream. Smuggler's Ford there. If current carries us, we live. We drove the horses into ice-biting water. Midstream, a scout loosed arrows. One grazed my hood before Roderick's countershot dropped him. We crawled up the far bank, soaked but breathing. Silas collapsed, pulse weak, not lost. Roderick eyed the southern horizon. 2 days to the capital if we cut across Ashenmoor. Bogs, bandits worse. And pursuers wearing our faces, I said, fingering the king's signet beneath my tunic. Proof matters only if I arrive alive to present it. We rigged a litter, dragged Silas, and entered the moor by noon. The soil exhaled sulfur, glassy crusts cracked underfoot. Once, the ground sighed warm and nearly swallowed my boot. Sweat pasted hair to my temples despite the chill wind. Near dusk hoofbeats rolled behind, 6 outriders. We pressed for a ring of standing stones, ruins of an old watchtower. Lightning forked, thunder masked our breath. Inside the low walls I spotted crates of black powder abandoned from an earlier war, seemed still packed with saltpeter crystals. An idea sparked. Silas carried 2 serpentine firecrackers, signal flares. Thunder will hide the sound, I whispered. Roderick fetched powder, scattering lines through shattered masonry. We hid Silas behind a dolmen, then waited. The riders burst in, torches wild. I struck flint. The first flare hissed and vanished beneath a rock just as thunder cracked. White light flared, horses shrieked, men reeled blinded. Roderick swept forward, pommel striking helmets. I tripped the lancer and pressed dagger to his throat before he could cry out. We bound 5, the 6th fled limping into darkness. Rain flattened the lingering sparks. Roderick's chest heaved. That flash was seen for leagues. Let Magnus wonder if the moor itself guards us, I said, sliding the ring back under my shirt. We set Silas on the litter, his eyes opened long enough for him to murmur, spectacle beat steel. We paused once at a ruined chapel of moss-eaten stone where rain gathered in a baptismal font. I cleaned Silas's wound with the icy water, while Roderick dismantled pews for kindling. Silas clenched his jaw but did not cry out. When I finished, he whispered, I followed Magnus because he promised I'd matter. Tonight you made me matter without promises. His words weighed more than any vow. While a tiny fire hissed, Roderick unrolled the map. If we skirt Widow's Cut, this ravine here, we shave ours but cross open heath visible for miles. He looked at me. Do we risk exposure or lose time? I remembered the horn and Magnus' fury. We risk exposure. Speed is the only armor we own. Before leaving, I pried a splinter of stained glass from the chapel's shattered window and tucked it beside the signet. A relic of faith, fragile yet sharp, proof that broken things can still draw blood for a cause. Back on a trail, clouds shredded to reveal a sickle moon. Wolves howled, sensing armies where we saw only darkness. Roderick spoke little, yet twice I caught him glancing at me with something like an expression I never thought a knight could turn upon a kitchen maid. It frightened and steadied me at once. By mid-morning, Silas regained full senses, enough to hobble beside the litter when the ground grew too steep for dragging. He refused pity. Save your strength for talking kings into sanity, he joked. I tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. The weight of words yet to be spoken pressed like armor, heavier than plate. Sunrise bled peach across distant clouds, and there, faint but real, stood the capital's watchtowers. Hope tasted of wet stone and cold air. Yet behind us echoed a single horn, low, relentless. Magnus had found another path around a ruined pass. He would reach the city walls only hours after us. I tightened the reins. One night, one day, I vowed. No force of man or myth will keep this truth from the king. Ahead the road plunged into cedar shadow, and we rode, 3 battered souls carrying a kingdom's last fragile dawn. Dusk poured like ink over the capital when we reached the southern Barbican. Its portcullis, spiked iron teeth, stood lowered, for rumors of rebellion had already slithered through the streets. Lanterns glowed in archers' slits, each one a narrowed eye. Sir Roderick rode ahead, visor lifted, voice ringing, envoys bearing the king's seal. He displayed the signet on its red cord, now soot-smudged but unmistakable. Halberds crossed, barring our way. Captain Leofric, a granite-jawed veteran, peered down. Last night a dozen envoys arrived with forged sigils. Present your faces. Roderick removed his helm. I pushed back my hood. Silas, pale and feverish, braced against the saddle. Leofric's gaze snagged on the serpent brand at his throat. March or scum, explain yourself. Silas opened cracked lips, but I spoke first. He is witness to Prince Magnus' treason. We carry proof in ink and blood. I rode closer so torchlight brightened my smoke-streaked cheeks. Hold us here, Captain, and the enemy you fear will be inside the walls before dawn. Leofric weighed the words, then looked to Roderick, known in every garrison. The knight's nod tipped the scale. Chains rattled, the gate yawned, and we clattered into streets already thrumming with panic. Church bells tolled a warning cadence usually reserved for plague. The palace hill glimmered ahead, yet the city felt like a powder room primed for spark. Crowds jammed alleys, arguing whether the north had fallen. Merchants shuttered stalls. Soldiers barked for order, while rumors bred faster than flies. We dismounted at the royal stables and thrust reins into trembling hostlers. Silas sagged, sweat on his brow. "Find a leech," Roderick ordered, but I shook my head. Every second counts. We half-carried Silas through postern corridors that reeked of tallow and fear. At the throne antechamber, 2 blackguard knights blocked us, towering, visored, eyes unreadable. I brandished the scroll salvaged from Dawn's hollow, the serpent ink still visible where heat had coaxed it forth. "Urgent audience," I said. "The Queen will vouch." One guard slipped inside. Heartbeat stretched. Silas's knees buckled. I kept him upright, feeling heat through his torn jerkin, infection blooming. At last the door swung wide. The Queen herself stood, belly now heavy, yet her gaze sharp enough to skin lies. She ushered us into the candlelit hall where King Aurelian paced beneath painted angels that looked too small to lift the burdens of empire. "My city rings with chaos," he greeted, voice frayed. "Tell me you bring order." I knelt, no longer a trembling maid, but a messenger of flame. "Majesty, Magnus rides under the gray scythe. The northern legions are halted, but a western army approaches. The pass is sealed, yet he will skirt the highlands and strike by river road before dawn." I offered the stained scroll. "Here is the forged command." I guided his fingers to the serpent's sigil. The hand behind Vespasian. Aurelian read, jaw hardening. The Queen's hand found his, steadying. Roderick spoke next, concise. "We collapsed fallen stone pass, but Magnus pursues. The city walls stand, yet garrison morale is cracked by rumor." He indicated Silas. "This boy served the traitor. He can name captains bought with silver." The king beckoned physicians who whisked Silas away, but not before the boy squeezed my wrist. "Spectacle beats steel," he whispered, smile faint. Then he vanished behind velvet drapes. Aurelian turned to me. "Twice you have saved my crown, yet the realm still teeters. What counsel from the woman who silenced me?" I swallowed, feeling the hall's gilded saints peer down. "Magnus wins if the people believe his lies before they hear your truth. We must reach them first, strike louder than rumor, brighter than fear." "How?" the king asked. "Let the city see unity," the queen answered, surprising us. She rested a hand on her swelling belly. "Call the Candlemas vigil tonight. Light every torch on the walls. Summon guilds, clergy, street criers. Stand beside your maid advisor and your disgraced witness. Read the serpent's plot aloud so no tongue can twist it." Aurelian's eyebrows rose. "Expose weakness? Expose courage," she corrected. "Show that every voice, from scullion to sovereign, guards this crown." Her gaze found mine, an unspoken alliance of women whose worth had been weighed and misjudged. The king exhaled, tension leaving like smoke. "Very well." He turned to a steward. "Sound the great horn." All citizens to the plaza of 7 lanterns. Footsteps pounded away. Outside, bells shifted to a jubilant peal. Yet thunder rumbled too, the first report of Magnus Vanguard cannons testing range beyond the western orchards. We had ours, perhaps only one. Roderick clasped my shoulder. "You are about to speak to 10,000 souls." His voice softened. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," I admitted. I touched the signet where it lay cold against my heart. But fear kept me silent for too long. Trumpets flared. Torches sparked down every boulevard, a river of light snaking toward the plaza. The night drank oil and began to glow. Somewhere beyond the walls, Magnus would see that blaze and know the city had chosen spectacle, just not his. On the palace steps Aurelian, robed in state purple, waited. The queen stood at his right, hand on her unborn heir. And at his left, in a simple gown still char the hem, stood Marina the maid, voice of the truth that fire could not burn. The king gestured me forward. Murmurs rippled over the plaza like wind over wheat. I drew breath, feeling every shard of doubt, every lash of past humiliation, fuse into a single, steady flame. My words had toppled a chamber plot, blocked an army, and carried 3 souls through darkness. Now they must ignite hope in a city bracing for siege. I opened my mouth and spoke. The plaza stretched before me like a restless sea, torches trembling in thousands of hands, faces upturned, hungry for a single note of certainty. Somewhere far beyond the outer walls, cannon thunder rumbled again, a dull drumbeat trying to drown my heartbeat. I lifted the king's signet into the firelight, so its gold caught every eye. The murmurs stilled. "My name is Marina," I began, voice carried by polished brass trumpets placed along the colonnades. "Until yesterday, I scrubbed soot from palace ovens. Tonight I stand here because one man's pride tried to poison our kingdom with lies, and because a maid's silence would have cost a nation's future." A rustle of surprise swept the crowd. Even from the steps I felt it, like wind pushing back against storm clouds. I held up the forged scroll, its serpent sigil black against parchment. This document commanded our armies to abandon the city, to leave the queen and her unborn child undefended, and to slaughter those who questioned the order. It bears the mark of Prince Magnus, who marches on us now with mercenaries bought in blood coin. Gasps sharpened into anger. Somewhere a child cried. A woman hushed him, then raised her lantern higher. I continued steady. Magnus promised power to those who feared they had none. He told soldiers they were forgotten, servants they were worthless, merchants they would prosper at the point of a sword. He wove spectacle from shadows. But truth, my friends, is the brighter flame. Behind me, Aurelian stepped forward. Instead of silencing me, he knelt king bending knee beside a kitchen maid. A collective inhalation rippled outward. Disbelief shifted to. He spoke only 4 words, heard by every soul: "Stand with me, Marina." The gesture cracked something hardened inside the crowd. I felt a tide turn. "The Candlemas Vigil," the queen proclaimed, voice ringing clear, "begins now. Every guild, every parish, every household, light your beacon on the city walls. Let Magnus know we will not hide in fear. We will answer treachery with unity." Church wardens struck flints. Braziers sprang alive along battlements, then rooftops. A chain of fire licked up the 7 spires surrounding the plaza, each one a shout of defiance against the dark. Bells, great bronze hearts, thrummed in synchrony, shaking dust from cathedral rafters. Yet even as the city blazed, we all heard it, the outer gate drums, hammering frantically. A messenger sprinted across the flagstones, armor clanging. He knelt before the king and gasped. Magnus' vanguard rose the western river. Their siege towers will reach West Haven Gate by midnight. Fear threatened to reclaim the gathering. I stepped to the edge of the dais. "Listen." The word cracked like a whip. Faces turned back toward me. "A wall is stone, but a city is flesh and soul. Tonight you are both. We'll meet Magnus where his lies are weakest, in daylight, in witness, in numbers." Master Farrell, head of the Masons' Guild, raised a soot-gloved fist. "Show us where to stand, girl, and we'll build a wall he can't burn." The bakers behind him cheered, tossing flour into the air like sparks. A squad of city watch removed helms and lined up beside apprentices carrying nothing but chisels. Unity, fragile but real, crystallized. I turned to Aurelian. "Your Majesty, authorize the malicious. Post the Black Guard atop West Haven, but leave the guild banners visible. Magnus must see citizens under arms, not just soldiers." He nodded and issued the order. Roderick leaned close. "Bold plan. But if the river gate falls, then we make the fall our spectacle," I murmured. "We lure him into streets lit bright as noon, no shadows for treachery, only truth observed by every eye." The queen touched her belly. "And what of the unborn heir?" I met her gaze. "Hope needs a heart to beat in." I bowed. "I'll not let his first sunrise arrive under a usurper's banner." Catapults boomed in the distance. An orange bloom flared beyond southern rooftops, Magnus testing range. The crowd flinched, but the bells tolled louder, drowning panic in bronze thunder. Aurelian rose. "Citizens, take torches to the gates. Let no street lie dark, no rumor whisper unseen. Our enemy shall march blinded by your courage." He drew his sword, blade catching torch glow. "For crown, for city, for truth." A roar answered, raw and thunderous. People surged toward the avenues, lanterns aloft. From high above, the city looked like a star being born, light spreading vein by vein through every district. Roderick tugged his gauntlet. "Time to greet Magnus." He handed me a short sword, light, quick, the hilt wrapped in rough leather. "You've carried words, now carry steel. Speak with whichever tongue the night demands." I accepted, pulse steady. Let's give the prince his spectacle, and show him whose stage he's trespassed. As we descended the steps, a final bell tolled. The ancient iron sister struck only when the city stands on the brink. Its peal rolled over ramparts across river, and if mercy held, into Magnus' own chest. The battle for the story had begun. Tonight, truth wore torchlight and rang in bronze. Tonight, the kingdom's fate would hinge on whether a maid's flame could outshine a prince's shadow. Westhaven Gate loomed before us. Oak beams the width of oxen, freshly tarred, flanked by towers bristling with crossbows. Citizens formed ranks beneath gilt pennants, bakers with paddles, masons with mallets, while women gripping slings. Above them the black guard waited in disciplined rows, but tonight steel and sweat belonged to every class. Torchlight painted the cobbles gold, and the roar of distant drums told us Magnus' host was less than a mile away. Sir Roderick and I climbed the northern tower. From its crenellations we saw the river road snaking west, awash in shield glimmer and torch glow, an iron serpent winding toward the city. Siege engines trundled at its head, two towering rams and a trebuchet whose arm resembled a gallows. Each will crunch felt like a second shave from our lives. Roderick tightened his gauntlets. Once their trebuchet anchors, first stone flies in under 10 heartbeats. We must break that cadence. Below, Captain Leofric organized citizen archers. Their arrows were hunting shafts, not war bodkins, yet determination set hard edges on every face. I leaned over the parapet. Aim for torchbearers first. Darkness is our ally, kill his sight. They nodded, stringing bows with rawhide creaks that sounded eerily like whispered prayers. A trumpet shrieked from Magnus' line. The great rams surged, shields forming a tortoiseshell roof. Trebuchet crews dug in anchors. I swallowed. The city felt suddenly small, a cradle of light facing an ocean of night. Roderick handed me a horn. If the gate buckles, sound retreat to the inner wall. Hold it till dawn, royal reinforcements march at first light. I met his eyes. Dawn will come faster if the enemy listens to reason. He almost smiled. One more speech, Marina. I slid down the stairwell to the courtyard, where guild captains clustered around barrels of pitch. Spark-flecked wind tugged cloaks like impatient hands. I need volunteers to escort me to the ditch, I said. Not with swords, but with voices. Master Farrold stepped forward with 5 masons. A baker, flower-white, joined. 2 pages barely older than Silas grabbed lanterns. We slipped through the Sally Grove, an iron wicket in the gate side, and onto the killing field. Rain had ceased, leaving grass slick. We advanced until Magnus' vanguard spotted us. Archers lifted bows but hesitated, perhaps stunned by the absurdity of a woman in a charred gown carrying a torch. I raised the king's signet high so firelight flashed. My voice rang across the hush. Soldiers of the marches. Your prince bargains your blood for a throne he was denied by law. He forges orders, murders kin, and marches you against families who share your tongue. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Magnus himself rode forward, helm off, wolf teeth braided in hair. Spare us your kitchen tales, he called. Return to your hearth before it burns. He lifted a scroll, doubtless another forgery, then waved, and the trebuchet crew cranked. Iron rattled like some doom clock. I stepped closer so torchlight lit my face. Ask him why the serpent brand marks prisoners, not nobles. Ask how many boys like Silas he promised glory but sent as fodder. I flung the forged scroll onto the trampled grass. This document bears Magnus' cipher ordering the queen's death. Read it and choose whether her blood stains your hands. A captain in gray paused, lowering his spear. Magnus' glare sliced across him. The man flinched but did not raise the weapon again. The prince sneered. Words again, Marina? I answer with stones. He slashed his arm. The trebuchet arm lunged, hurling a fire pot that screeched overhead and burst against Westhaven's curtain, spraying flames. Citizens gasped, but bucket lines smothered sparks before they could climb. Magnus turned to rally his troops, but a boom cut him short. From the city wall, a catapult, one we dragged atop the tower at dusk, loosed its first payload, not stone, but baskets of limestone dust soaked in lamp oil. It burst in Magnus' front line, cloaking shields and helms in pale grit. The next salvo, flung seconds later, carried torches. Flames clung to the dust like bees to pollen. Suddenly the vanguard blazed, torches dropping, shields flailing. Darkness reclaimed the field as enemy torchlight guttered out. I seized the moment, horn to lips, sounding 3 rising notes, the guild's signal for stand firm. Citizen archers rained shafts into confusion. Magnus bellowed for order, but his right flank sagged as soldiers stampeded from burning comrades. He spurred toward me, eyes animal-wide, sword raised. But a figure intercepted, Sir Roderick, vaulting the ditch, steel meeting steel in a clang that sparked noonbright. Their duel became the battlefield's axis. I ran to the fallen scroll, snatched it, and sprinted back toward the gate even as Magnus' personal guard surged. Arrows hissed from our ramparts, thinning their ranks. Roderick parried a downward hack, riposted, and opened a crimson seam on Magnus' gauntlet. Prince reeled, fury incandescent. But victory wasn't steel. It was spectacle. From Westhaven's parapet, Captain Leofric unfurled a vast canvas stitched overnight by seamstresses. The city's crest intertwined with the serpent emblem, fangs snapped, crown unbroken, and bold script beneath, truth endures. Lanterns behind it turned the cloth into a glowing banner. Every enemy, ally citizen, rose to it. Magnus saw and understood, his symbol now shone as proof of failure. His shout to retreat was swallowed by rumbling hoofs as his front ranks buckled. Roderick disengaged and sprinted for the Sally Grove. I reached him, hauling him inside while porters cranked the iron wicket shut. Outside, Magnus' horns bleated an unsteady withdrawal. On the parapet, bells erupted in triumph, but I held up a soot-smeared hand. This was only his first blade, I warned breathlessly. He will circle for another strike by dawn. Roderick wiped blood from his cheek. Then we be the anvil he breaks upon. Still, when I glanced at the plaza behind us and saw torchlight reflecting in 1,000 resolute eyes, I felt the balance tilt. The city had tasted its strength, and once people savor truth sung louder than fear, no usurper's shadow can easily darken it again. Torch smoke still drifted over Westhaven when I reached the infirmary. The great hall, once a banquet chamber, now rang with clatter of basins and low groans. Cots lined the walls. Surgeons darted like swallows through a forest of makeshift curtains. But one bed drew my eye. Silas lay propped by quilts, skin waxen, his serpent brand half hidden beneath poultice wrappings. As I knelt, his eyelids fluttered open. Did we hold?" he whispered. "We bent, not broke," I said, smoothing sweat-damp hair from his brow. Magnus recoiled, but dawn will decide. He smiled, faint but proud. "Then I'll live until sunrise at least." A physician approached, hands red-stained. "Bolts out, but fever ravages him. We need ice for his blood and silverleaf to flush the rot." Supplies were scarce after weeks of tension. I promised to return with what I could and slipped back into corridors thrumming with preparations. In the council chamber, King Aurelian stood over a sand table map scored with miniatures, river lines, gates, troops no bigger than matchsticks. The queen, pale yet steady, traced potential breach points with a quill. Sir Roderick leaned on the table, gauntlet ringing. I cleared my throat. Magnus' trebuchet survived. He'll try a night flanking across the river shallows, less defended than Westhaven. I pointed to a narrow meander south of the walls. If he floats a battering raft, one lucky strike on the sluice gate could flood the lower wards. Aurelian rubbed tired eyes. "We cannot plug every hole. Then we choose the hole he least expects," I replied. "We meet him outside it." Roderick straightened. "A sally, a diversion," I corrected. "Magnus still trades in spectacle." He saw his banner mocked. Now he needs a grand revenge to keep his mercenaries loyal. He'll focus on the raft, believing we'll cower behind stone. We send a small force across the drainage tunnel beneath the old mint, circle behind his artillery line, and torch it. The queen raised a brow. "That tunnel is half collapsed. I crawled through it once to rescue a lost scullion," I said, surprising even myself. "It will pass 3, maybe 4 fighters, quiet, unseen." I met Aurelian's gaze. "Send me." The king's jaw tensed. "You've risked enough." "Truth isn't safe," I countered. "It demands wagers until the board is clean." Silence brittle as winter glass hung. Then Roderick spoke. "I'll lead the strike." He eyed me with equal parts respect and fear. "But I won't crawl those stones without the woman who knows them." Aurelian's shoulders sagged with reluctant acceptance. "Very well. Choose 2 more. Strike the artillery before the moon sets." I dipped my head and turned, but the queen's voice halted me. She offered a tiny silver reliquary. Inside is blessed leaf, ground fine. Boil it for your friend's fever if fate returns you. Warm gratitude choked me. I tucked the relic safe beside the signet and hurried to muster. Roderick picked our third, Captain Leofric, grim, unbreakable, and at my insistence, an apprentice bell ringer named Hanno whose thin frame would navigate the narrowest crawl. At the mint's basement, we unbolted a rusted grate. Frigid water lapped ankles as we descended into blackness. Rats fled ahead, slime slimed stone. I led, lantern hooded. Air grew tight. The ceiling scraped helmet rims. After 50 paces, rubble blocked 3/4 of the channel, leaving a crawl space scarcely wider than my shoulders. This narrows farther ahead, I warned, voice echoing damp. Leofric muttered a prayer while forcing bulk through. Halfway, the tunnel bent sharply, and moonlight gleamed faint beyond the far grate. But another glint caught my eye. Wires strung across water, turned to the side just enough to escape lamplight. A trip bell trap. I signal halt, cutting it with a surgical flick of dagger. The light vibration rippled into nothingness. We emerged behind a blackberry thicket at river's edge. Across the ford, Magnus' trebuchet crouched like a crouched dragon, arm cocked, crews stacking fresh firepots. A line of ditch torches painted silhouettes, 40 mercenaries, 2 captains. Farther back, a pavilion stood, its canvas newly sewn, emblem shrouded. Probably Magnus' field throne, ready for triumphant dawn. I tasted bile. His arrogance was an open wound. Roderick passed small clay granados, black powder orbs with linstock fuses. Hanno lights, Marina places, Leofric guards. We crept, using willow shadows. Night insects hummed, river hissed over stones. Every heartbeat sounded like a drum. At the trebuchet's axle, I wedged 2 granados into greasy timber joints. Hanno struck flint, sparks spark, until wisp of smoke coiled. We darted to the next engine. But as I bent, a boot crunched behind me. A sentry, invisible till now. Roderick leapt, blade flashing, yet the guard managed to scream before steel quieted him. Torches swung. Alarm horns bit the dark. Note time. I jammed the last orb, smashed the linstock against flint, flare hissed bright. Run! Leofric bellowed. We bolted riverward, arrows snapping past. Hanno slipped. I hauled him by collar. Splashing through knee-deep water, we dove just as an explosion ripped sky open. Orange plume, shards of oak spinning like meteors. A second blast answered, brighter still. Embers rained across speeding current. Screams of panic tangled with orders. We slogged up the far bank, lungs burning, and ducked beneath the mint grate as 2 more blasts thundered, magazine barrels catching fire. Smoke followed us into the tunnel like furious breath. Behind, Magnus' artillery line collapsed in roaring chaos. Ahead, the city awaited our signal, 3 quick peals from cathedral bell if we lived. Hanno clutched the bell, pole hung around his neck. I'll ring it, he gasped. If my arms still work. I touched the reliquary the queen had given, its silver warm despite chill water. Then hurry, ringer, I whispered. Silas's dawn, and all of ours, depends on that sound. We burst from the tunnel mouth like revenants, soaked and reeking of river silt. Behind us, Magnus' camp seethed in orange turmoil, broken engines crackling, tents aflame, shouts fracturing command. Hanno ran for the belfry steps, clutching the leather pole like a pilgrim's relic. Roderick, Leofric, and I staggered into the mint yard just as the first bell stroke told. 3, quick, bright notes slicing pre-dawn hush. City patrols answer with whistles. Signal fires leapt along parapets. From rooftops, families cheered, not knowing the full shape of our gamble. Only that hope had rung again. I held a hand to my ribs, feeling bruises bloom like violets. We bought maybe an hour, Roderick rasped. Smoke darkened his silvered temples. Long enough to mend walls, not spirits. Spirits heal when they hear truth, I replied. We'll speak it once more, where Magnus cannot smother it. First, I hurried to the infirmary. Silas still sweated, delirious, murmuring half-remembered war songs. I crushed the queen's silver leaf in hot broth. It sent, sharp, clean, like rain on slate, filled his corner. He swallowed with a shiver, then slept deeper, color lifting faintly in his cheeks. The physician raised weary brows. If he sees sunset, thank whatever saint you favor. Thank a queen's mercy, I said, brushing hair from Silas's brow. Then I turned to war again. The plaza before Cathedral of 7 Lanterns seethed with armored guild columns awaiting orders. I climbed a cargo crate, lifted the smolder-blackened scroll, and addressed them. Magnus' siege engines lie in shards, but his hunger stands untouched. He will hurl fear next, rumors of secret gates, poison wells, traitors in our midst. Meet every rumor with a lamp and an open door. Let no citizen spend his dawn alone. Apprentice chandlers darted off with wax sticks. Bakers vowed to keep ovens blazing free loaves. Monks threw open scriptorium stacks as shelters for the frail. Watching, I felt something vast knit itself. Not power decreed from thrones, but strength spun at street level, thread to thread. Leofric approached, helm tucked under arm. Scouts report Magnus regrouping on the south ridge. He still commands a heart guard of 400 elite. If they charge the sluice causeway at sunrise, they'll breach before we can pivot. I looked east. The horizon's ink thinned to cobalt. Then we meet him halfway, force his elite onto ground of our choosing. Roderick grinned through grime. You favor bold boards, my lady. Bold, but honest, I said. Truth and steel, spoken plain. We gathered 200 volunteers, city watch, dockhands, even cloistered novices gripping quarterstaves. They marched behind the black guard toward the causeway, torches guttering in damp wind. At its midpoint rose an ancient toll arch, stone ribs spanning the marsh channel. I chose it as our pivot, narrow enough to strangle cavalry, high enough for archers hidden in the attic rafters. As dawn paled, Magnus' vanguard emerged from drifting smoke, grim riders in overlapping mail, spear points glinting. At their center rode the prince, wolf-tooth braids still intact, though soot filmed his armor. He raised a horn and sounded a single note, low mocking. His line advanced at trot. I stepped beneath the arch, flanked by Roderick and Leofric. No helmet hid my singed hair. Only the king's signet lay bright over my chest. I called, voice carrying across still water. Prince Magnus, your engines burn, your lies unravel. Turn back while a bridge still stands between you and pardon. He laughed, harsh, brittle. Pardon? My claim is older than this mud-built city. Stand aside, Maid, or drown in its fall. His cavalry spurred, hooves drummed on planks. I lifted a hand, the signal. Above, hidden masons drove wedges. Ropes groaned. With a thundercrack, counterweights swung, and the toll arch's inner portcullis, and used for a century, dropped behind us, sealing the causeway's throat. Magnus' vanguard skidded to a halt, bottlenecked, momentum broken. From attic slits, guild archers loosed. Shafts rattled off shields, some finding gaps. Magnus' horse reared, he cursed, hacking arrows from air. Yet his riders pressed forward, forming a spearhead aimed at me. Roderick met their charge, blade gleaming. Leofric anchored the flank, hammer pulping shield rims. I fought too, short sword flashing in rhythms grandmother had taught with kitchen ladles. Fear burned away, replaced by clarion sense. Every parry, every barked order, was another sentence in the story I chose to write. Magnus cut through 2 guards, locked blades with Roderick again. Sparks flew, steel singing. Your kingdom rots, he snarled. Why spill blood for a crown that grinds you to flour? Roderick growled, because flour feeds nations, while your hunger devours them. He drove Magnus back a step, another. I saw the prince shift weight, wounded gauntlet slower. I darted in, slashing the strap that held his damaged plate. Metal fell, blood welled. He howled, swung wild, I ducked. Roderick's pommel struck Magnus' temple. The prince toppled hard, sword skidding across planks. For a heartbeat the battle froze. Magnus' guard hesitated, glancing between fallen leader and our encircling ranks. I raised my voice. Kneel, and you walk away alive. Fight, and these waters will remember your names as echoes only. One by one, spears lowered. Knees struck wood. The sun breached the horizon, first gold blades slicing clouds. On ramparts behind us, bells rang again, not in alarm but in triumph. Roderick bound Magnus hands with chain. The prince spat at my boots. A maid wearing a ring does not make a queen. No, I said, breathing hard. But a maid speaking truth can crown one. I turned to the surrendered soldiers. Carry word to your camps, the siege is over. Your paymaster's war ends here. They rose, weapons reversed. Crossing to the city side of the arch, citizens lining the walls watched them pass in wary silence that soon cracked into ragged applause. Above, morning light ignited every window pane. And in that blaze I understood. We had not just defended stone. We had authored a new script, servants alongside kings, truth beside power, hope reforged beneath ringing bells. The night had been long, but dawn, ours now, shone brighter for every shadow it had pierced. Magnus was led through Westhaven in chains, the serpent brand on his throat now a badge of failure. Citizens lined the streets, some spitting, some whisper praying, not out of vengeance, but disbelief that the storm had truly broken. I followed with Roderick and Leofric, my boots squelching from river mud, my sword suddenly heavier than its steel. Victory, I discovered, weighs more than fear. At the palace, a tribunal convened in the Hall of Echoes, where every word is said to linger a century. The queen, pale but composed, sat beside the king. Magistrates formed a semicircle. Witnesses stood ready. Silas had been carried in on a litter, fever broken, eyes clear if tired. When the herald called Marina of the kitchens, I stepped forward, the king's signet gleaming at my throat. The murmurs of nobles, once dripping with disdain, felt distant as seabirds. I read aloud the scroll whose ink had nearly fractured a kingdom, holding it so the assembly could see the serpent's knotted sigil. Then I spoke of the forged orders, the mountain pass, the burning trebuchets, the archway duel, each episode not as self-praise but as proof that treachery thrives on darkness and crumbles in light. Silas confirmed my words, naming captains bribed by Magnus. Leofric added testimony of the siege tactics. Roderick described the prince's confessions muttered between clenched teeth. Magnus was offered a final statement. Shackles rattling, he glared at the court. I sought only what birth promised me, he hissed. You crowned weakness over blood. His gaze stabbed toward me. A kingdom ruled by maids and masons will crumble faster than stone under frost. Aurelian's reply was soft, yet every arch caught it. A kingdom held up by servants' shoulders stands firmer than one balanced on a single man's ego. The tribunal pronounced sentence: exile to the Barrier Isles, forfeiture of titles, a single longboat with 3 days of rations. Magnus snarled, but guards hauled him out. His echo faded like a dying drum. Outside, bells rang a brighter peal, the midday benediction, while banners were unfurled across balconies. Wheat gold for harvest, flame red for courage, sky blue for renewal. I slipped away to the infirmary. Silas dozed, color returning. I set a bowl of broth by his pillow. His eyes fluttered open. The bells sound free, he murmured. They ring your part in the story, I said. Rest, and one day you'll tell it with pride rather than pain. He squeezed my wrist, gratitude and something like hope shining where despair once lived. Toward dusk, Aurelian summoned me to the Rose Walk, the palace rampart lined with climbing blooms. Petals drifted on warm breeze, the siege already a ghost. The king held a scroll, unbroken wax dangling between his fingers. The council petitions to elevate you to mistress of whispers, advisor on intelligence and civic council, he said. You would have stipend, apartments, a place in conclave. My stomach nodded. I glanced at flour-smudged hands that had not touched kneaded dough since the day before yesterday, yet still knew the rhythm of daily labor. Majesty, I answered carefully, I accept, but on terms. He arched an eyebrow. Name them. First, the post must be open to any commoner after me, chosen by merit, not blood. Second, a council of guild delegates should sit quarterly with the throne to speak of grain prices, street repairs, crises before they reach revolt. Truth, if consulted often, won't need to shout and fire. Aurelian brushed a rose petal from his sleeve, thoughtful. Innovations bred in war rarely endure peace. Yet perhaps that is when we need them most. He pressed the sealed scroll into my hand. Draft your charter, place my seal when ready. I bowed, heart thundering. From behind the lattice stepped the queen, one hand on her rounded belly. The child within me will inherit a crown forged this week in humility and courage, she said. Will you stand as godmother, guardian of truth, when the day comes? Emotion stole speech. I managed a nod. She smiled, serenity tempered by exhaustion, and placed a rosebud in my palm. Plant it in the kitchens, she whispered. Let it remind the staff that fragrant things bloom where ash once lay. Night fell warm, scented by victory. In the lower ward a feast unfurled, stews bubbling in cauldrons, musicians fiddling reels. Guild banners ringed bonfires. Blackguards danced with seamstresses. Masons hammered tables into makeshift stages. Roderick pressed a cup of mulled cider into my hand. Your words keep beating in my skull, he said. I think I'll hang up sword training twice a week and teach letters to squires. Teach letters to pages, too, I teased. They copy the orders that steer armies. Laughter burst around us, alive, contagious. In that hum, I felt the pulse of an awakened city, fear replaced by fellowship, hierarchy softened into interlocking gears. I looked up. The stars glittered like fresh-struck sparks, and for the first time the heavens felt less like distant jewels and more like lamps held aloft by unseen allies. Near midnight, I returned to the kitchens. Soot stains still marked the hearth, but the air smelled of rising bread. I pressed the rosebud into damp soil near the oven vent. Warm drafts would coax its bloom. As I covered the root with dark earth, I whispered the mantra grandmother had given me as a child. Words are keys. Choose doors worth opening. Doors had opened, some with hinges torn by storm, others by gentle hands, and on the threshold of each stood people ready to step through, unafraid. Above the ovens a new dawn, still hours away, nevertheless felt close enough to taste. Yeast, honey, and possibility. I rose, wiped soil on my skirts, and turned toward corridors where torches guttered low, guiding me to the council chamber where I would write a charter unlike any the kingdom had ever seen. Truth had spoken in the hall, on the wall, and across the water. Now it would be etched in ink, so future whispers need not become wars. Behind me, the rosebud shivered, unfolding the first petal of its bloom. Ink bled midnight blue across the parchment as I dipped the quill once more. The council chamber, usually hushed and formal, buzzed with night activity. Guild scribes sharpening pens, a city watch captain pacing like caged hound, two abbesses debating comma placement as fiercely as theologians over doctrine. Steam from braziers curled around us, carrying the twin scents of rose oil and still smoldering pitch, reminders of siege and survival entwined. At the table's head sat King Aurelian, doublet unfastened, crown set beside his elbow like an ordinary circlet instead of the world's weight. The queen reclined near the hearth, feet lifted on a cushioned stool, one palm moving in slow circles over her unborn heir. Sir Roderick leaned against a pillar, armor polished yet dinted, keeping silent watch while pretending to study the draft. When his gaze met mine, pride flickered, tempered by vigilance that habits of war would not soon release. I read aloud the latest clause. Henceforth, the citizens' assembly shall convene each quarter moon, comprised of one elected voice from every recognized guild, one from each parish, and one from the palace household. Matters of grain levy, city defense, and royal taxation shall not be ratified without their recorded council. Gasps followed, the sharpened hail of noble counselors and used to sharing power with soap-makers or ostlers. Yet no one spoke objection, not after the week they'd witnessed. Instead, the ink dried in unanimous silence, as if the parchment itself approved. Next came the provision dearest to me. I steadied my breath, feeling grandmother's memory hover like a lantern over my shoulder. The office of Whisper Steward is hereby established, an advisor appointed solely by proven merit, regardless of birth, charged to collect truths from all strata of the realm and present them without fear or favor. I paused. If ever the steward is hindered or their reports ignored, the assembly may ring the iron sister bell outside of plague or invasion, requiring the crown to appear in open forum within 12 hours. Aurelian's brows rose, but rather than bristle, he nodded once, sealing the line with royal flourish of quill. A king who fears a bell does not deserve a throne, he murmured. The queen's approving smile carried something fiercer than any command. When the final paragraph was set, voting rules for replacements after my tenure, I slid the parchment to the monarch. He pressed the signet hard enough to leave a welt in the wax, then handed the ring back across the table. Its weight in my palm felt different now, not a borrowed badge, but a reminder of responsibility freely chosen. Morning light spilled amber through stained glass as we carried the charter to the cathedral steps. Crowds packed the plaza again, yet the tension of siege had melted into anticipatory hum, like strings tuned before a festival song. Bakers sold honey rolls at cost. Blacksmiths offered nail repairs to any cracked door. Children hoisted plate shields painted with broken serpent symbols. Silas, pale yet steady, stood beside me in a clean tunic, his serpent brand bandaged and partly hidden by a new kerchief embroidered with wheat stalks, the guild of his mother, who'd arrived from the countryside overnight to find her boy reborn a city hero. He leaned on a crutch, but when the herald unfurled the charter, he straightened, face alight. I mounted the dais with the king and queen. Trumpets blared, bells pealed a bright scale, followed by the Iron Sisters' single booming note, this time rung in celebration, not alarm. Aurelian raised his hands. People of Valerian, he began, voice resonant. You defended these walls because you believe them worth more than stone. Today we lay new foundations in ink and trust, stronger than mortar." He gestured to me. I unrolled the charter so the crowd could see the fresh seal. "This document belongs not to parchment, but to every hand that guided its quill, yours," I said. "It promises that no whisper will be too small, no hearth too distant for the crown to hear." Murmurs swelled into cheers. Guild flags dipped in salute. Even skeptical nobles clapped gloved hands. I caught Silas's eye. He nodded once, tears glimmering like dewdrops on steel. Then the queen stepped forward, her voice softer yet somehow carrying farther than trumpets. "When my child is born, their first lullaby will be the bells you rang, their first lesson that a kingdom's heartbeat lives in kitchens and quarries as surely as in courts." She placed the rosebud, now half opened, atop the charter, petals glowing scarlet against cream paper. Festivities spilled through the day. Contests of song, dramatized retellings of the siege woven with comedic flourishes that coaxed laughter where only panic had lived days prior. At dusk, torches lined the refurbished West Haven causeway. The surrendered mercenaries, released after swearing fealty or choosing safe passage home, helped masons reset planks, under guard but also under watchful eyes of townsfolk who offered bread and cautious gestures of reconciliation. I wandered the ramparts alone for a moment, letting cooling wind chase sweat from my brow. Below, moonlit river hummed. Somewhere a lute plucked a wistful ballad. Roderick appeared at my side, helm tucked beneath arm. "City sleeps armed, yet not afraid," he mused. "A rare piece. It will hold," I said, surprising myself with certainty. He extended a slim volume bound in faded calfskin. "Found this in the Royal Library, North Tongue Poetry. Thought you might widen the steward's lexicon." I opened to a page. "A single voice can turn the tide, if it carries the weight of those unheard." The line felt carved for the week we'd lived. I closed the book, met the knight's steady gaze. "Until recently, we'd been divided by birth and custom. Now we shared a comradeship soldered in flame." "Thank you," I said simply, and he inclined his head, not as superior or guardian, but equal. As the second moon of spring crested, I returned to the kitchens. Out of habit, I checked the ovens. Loaves rose golden, scent mingling with newly planted rose that, astonishingly, had already unfurled 3 petals despite the shock of transplant. I touched its stem. Thorns were tender, not yet hardened, proof that growth requires both strength and softness. Grandmother's voice whispered from memory, "Choose doors worth opening." I thought of tunnels and gates, tribunal halls and improvised classrooms soon to bloom beneath Roderick's tutelage. So many doors now ajar, each promising stories whose first lines were still ink-wet. I dipped a finger in flour, traced a small key symbol on the hearthstone, then smiled. Behind me, the city dreamed under watchful stars, bells quiet but ready. Truth, armored in torchlight and sealed by common hands, would keep vigil, a steward no darkness could silence again. Summer arrived like a forge at full stoke, heat shimmering above slate roofs, as though the city itself were exhaling embers after all it had endured. With the charter scarcely 6 weeks old, life felt both strangely ordinary and entirely remade. Criers no longer shouted rumors of revolt. Instead, they announced guild assembly agendas and literacy lessons on the palace lawn. The scent of fresh mortar blended with honeysuckle where stonemasons repaired siege scars while gardeners coaxed green from charblack soil. My days as whisper steward began before dawn. I would slip from apartments once reserved for visiting barons, cross the servants' courtyard still damp with dew, and settle in the lower scriptorium, formerly a storage vault, now bustling with clerks who copied petitions onto neat folios color-coded by urgency. Children of scullions and chandlers sharpened quills beside young nobles. The only rank that mattered was clarity of ink. Each morning I read a stack of voices, requests for floodgates on the river ward, complaints about wheat weights, warnings of pickpockets nesting near the candle market. I sorted them into 3 piles: solve, study, bring before council, and felt a small thrill each time a kitchen boy's scrawl traveled the same road as a magistrate decree. Yet not every whisper was gentle. One humid morning a sealed packet arrived bearing the quiver arrow sigil of the Outer Watch. Inside lay a rough map and a single line: serpent banners sighted at the Quarry Road Tavern tonight. The serpent again. Magnus diehard loyalists? The blood in my ears throbbed with old alarm, but the charter demanded response, not panic. I summoned Sir Roderick and Captain Leofric to the Rose Walk where evening breeze offered rare relief. We studied the map beneath lantern glow, cicadas sawing rhythm behind us. Could be drunken braggarts, Leofric mused, tapping the crossroads. Lot of vacant talk over sour ale. Or a spark waiting for dry straw, Roderick countered. His gaze found mine. What says the steward? That we put eyes and ears before blades, I answered. I'll go in plain dress, hear what's spoken. 2 guards at distance, no colors. Roderick scowled, but Leofric grinned. A maid once silenced a king. She can likely hush a tavern. The Quarry Road Tavern crouched at city's ragged edge where quarrymen drank away dust and coin alike. I donned a wool gown stained to the hem, braided hair into a simple knot, smeared soot on my cheeks. At dusk I slipped inside with the smell of pine beer and coal smoke. Conversation churned, complaints about chest-crushing heat, wagers on autumn grain, bawdy jokes. But in one corner 4 men huddled over tankards, snake sigil pins glinting bronze at their throats. I drifted closer, balancing a tray of bread crusts. Their leader, a rangy fellow with pitchy fingernails, spoke low yet urgent. Alls won't hold him long, he muttered. Magnus will return when tide turns. We need coin for boats, steel for blades. City's soft now, ruled by cooks and cradle babies. Another spat. Soft. Did you not see the arch where he fell? The maid still breathing. People say her words turn iron. Words crack no skull. The leader snarled. Gather 2 dozen. When the Candlemas bell rings harvest mass, we strike. Torch the scriptorium. Burn their fancy charter. My spine chilled. Flame illuminating parchments, the symbol of new order, would shred faith faster than soldiers ever could. I placed the tray on their table. Let them think me barmaid. Fingers trembling only slightly, I spilled a measure of ale across their map. They cursed. I feigned apology, dabbing cloth while eyes memorized plotted streets. Minutes later I slipped outside, moonlight pooled like silver molten. Roderick emerged from shadows, hand on hilt. They plan arson at Candlemas Mass, I whispered. A hymn's hush, then fire. Serpents in the cradle, he growled. No fear in the cradle. Serpents only thrive if we feed them secrecy. I exhaled. We answer with witness again. At dawn the citizens' assembly convened in the Candle Hall, a circular plaza roofed by glass panes now repaired after siege cracks. I stood before guild delegates, holding the ale-stained map aloft. Traitors would burn your ink, I said. They believe torches speak louder than trust. So we will outshine them, literally. I proposed a lantern vigil. Every shop, stall, chapel, and cart to hang an oil lantern through Candlemas night. The plaza itself to blaze with 500 mirrors reflecting braziers skyward. If light blankets every street, arsonists find no shadow to hide their spark. Deliberation lasted a heartbeat. Unanimous gavel strike proved. Preparations ignited the city faster than rumor. Chandlers donated wax. Glassblowers worked midday heat so fierce they fainted between kills. Children delivered lanterns by wheelbarrow, singing a ditty about snakes afraid of sunbeams. Even nobles parted with silver candle holders, eager to see their crests glimmer in communal glow. Silas, now steady on both feet, oversaw courtyard staging. He approached me near dusk carrying a lantern of hammered tin shaped like a wheat sheaf. For the scriptorium door, he said. If they aim to burn scrolls, let wheat guard parchment. His grin, once timid, radiated wheatfield confidence. Candlemas night arrived. Bells tolled, hymns floated, and light endless, trembling, jubilant, bathed the capital until it looked fashioned from amber instead of stone. Mirrors fixed atop watchtowers ricocheted flame across rooftops. River ripples glittered. Even the moon's pale shine seemed jealous amid such earthbound stars. Roderick's covert watch captured the serpent conspirators just past midnight, their cloaks luminous targets beneath lantern glare. Not a blade was drawn. Citizens pointed them out with calm firmness. Their officer, by the brazier. The city itself imprisoned the darkness. At sunrise I stood on palace balcony, lanterns still swinging from my hand. Streets echoed with quiet fatigue, bakers yawning, guards blinking sleep from eyes, but no ash-marred parchment, no smoke-tainted dawn. The charter had survived its first true test, not by swords but by thousands of small flames chosen freely. I closed my eyes, feeling warmth on lids, and understood. Vigilance was not a posture of fear, but a practice of shared light. So long as torches passed from hand to hand, serpents would find every shadow already claimed by watchful hearts. A soft step, the queen beside me, belly rounder, face lit gold. She touched the lantern. "A kingdom of lamps," she whispered. "And keys," I replied, thinking of the sign I'd traced in flour. "Doors open easiest under bright sky." Below, the city exhaled, tired, proud, unbroken. And above its roofs the first hot breezes of stone-melt summer carried petals from the rosewalk, scattering them over gutters and grand avenues alike. Small, fragrant reminders that what once defended in fire must now be nurtured in bloom. Stone-melt summer yielded to a swifter-than-expected autumn, the air turning crisp as though the kingdom itself exhaled at last. By then the charter's ink had weathered its first downpour, and lantern glass still winked from nearly every doorway, kept now by habit, not decree. I, Marina of the kitchens, found my schedules divided between diplomacy and dirt, half my hours spent in council halls, the other half kneeling beside masons and gardeners, coaxing life from charred cracks no architect had intended. One dawn the Queen sent for me. I met her in the nursery wing, frescoes of wheat and constellations painted across ceilings still drying to mat. She sat at a high-arched window, sewing tiny silver bells onto a silk swaddling blanket. Her child would arrive within weeks, and her calm shone steadier than torchlight. "I've read every line you filed this month," she said, offering tea laced with lemon verbena. New sluice gates funded, traveling teachers dispatched to quarry villages, a rogue band of highwaymen negotiated into the Royal Courier Corps, all before harvest moon. A smile tugged her lips. "You wield pen like sword." I flushed. "Ink weighs less but cuts farther." The Queen's gaze drifted to the courtyard where guild apprentices erected a public forum pavilion. "And yet," she mused, "every blade, ink or iron, needs scabbard rest. When my child is born, we will rely on you even more. Have you considered what nourishes you?" The question stunned me. I thought of late-night parchment piles, dawn patrols, adrenaline's sharp aftertaste. "Duty nourishes," I said, yet felt how thin the answer sounded. She placed a hand on mine. "Duty is bread. Joy is fruit. Eat both." Joy, I discovered, hid in unexpected turnings. That same afternoon letters arrived from the Barrier Isles. Magnus, exiled and stripped of title, demanded audience with the Whisper Steward. Many urged dismissal, others smelled trap. I sensed something else, a man forced to watch his legend shrink to the size of his own reflection in tide pools. With King's consent, I penned a reply, formal, unflinching. "Truth stands open to every voice, even those that once sought to silence it. Speak, and your words will be recorded without amendment. But the charter denies anonymity. Your name must sign each claim." Weeks passed. No answer came. Perhaps the Isle's wind swallowed his ink. Or perhaps the requirement of honest authorship weighed heavier than chains. Either way, silence became its own confession, a lesson I filed under study. In mid-harvest, the citizens' assembly met beneath the new pavilion, a lattice of cedar and brass that caught afternoon sun like a harp of light. I stood with the guild delegates as they debated levy ratios for next season's grain. Opposing sides grew heated. Rhetoric threatened to slide toward insults. Old habits die reluctantly. I raised my hands, recalling the crowd that night on palace steps months prior. "A kingdom is a loaf," I said. "Flour is gathered grain. Salt is mind rock. Yeast is living breath. Each alone is inert or bitter. Together they rise. Let's measure not what one hand surrenders, but what all hands share when the loaf is split." Silence rippled, then nods. A miller suggested sliding scale levies tied to rainfall tallies. A baron's steward offered surplus cellar grain as drought reserve. Motion carried, unanimous again. I felt grandmother's old lantern warm inside my chest. Later that evening, I found Sir Roderick on a rosewalk, sharpening a practice blade beneath moon-silver petals. He invited me to spar. I laughed, citing my ink-stained sleeves, but accepted. Under starlight we circled, steel nib meeting steel edge, each faint and parry echoing conversations we'd had with words. When he finally disarmed me with a twist not unlike turning a page, I toppled onto marble laughing so hard tears blurred constellations. Roderick offered a hand. "Your guard drops when you chase analogy," he teased. "Noted," I said, catching breath. Our clasp lingered, a pause rich with possibilities neither of us named, though their futures fluttered in the night air like loose parchment corners. Weeks later the Queen went into labor beneath the hunter's moon. Bells rang thrice, once to summon midwives, once to notify council, and a third to request a lullaby sung from every hearth at midnight. I stood in the palace kitchens, leading cooks in a hush-soft melody of old North Tongue lullabies, words my grandmother had woven between forbidden grammars. Across the city, voices joined. The walls themselves seemed to hum. At dawn, the king stepped onto the balcony, tears and triumph entwined. A daughter, he proclaimed, healthy and fierce of cry. He presented the infant swaddled in a silver bell blanket, her tiny fist already clutching air as if at reins of destiny. The plaza erupted in cheers. Petals, saved from summer pruning, floated like confetti. The queen later entrusted me to record the birth's omens in the royal chronicle. I wrote, on the first breath of the princess Isolde, the people's song filled the courtyard louder than any trumpet, proving again that the heart of a realm beats in many chests. Autumn's last leaves spiraled through corridors by the time I next visited the kitchen's rose. It had climbed half the wall, blooms thick as spilled ink drops crimsoning stone. I trimmed a stem and placed the blossom beside my desk, where petitions piled like freshly milled flour. One parchment bore a quarry child's careful script, thanking the assembly for teachers, asking if stories could travel south as well. I dipped quill, answered yes, sealed with the charter crest and a small hand-drawn key. Under lamp glow, the reply seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, seed of future doors. Duty nourishes. Joy sustains. Truth lights the path. And so, as harvest wagons creaked over cobbles and furnace smoke curled skyward in readiness for winter, I felt no hunger save the eagerness to witness what new questions would arrive with the dawn, and what answers we, together, would rise to bake. Snow whispered into the capital on the back of the first north wind, soft at first, like shy applause tapping rooftops, then thicker, layering stone and memory alike beneath a clean white hush. Standing on the ramparts at dawn, I watched chimney smoke braid with snowst, and couldn't help recalling the night flames licked these same walls. How far we traveled, people, crown, and the small voice of a maid who had once quaked before marble columns. Inside the palace, life adapted to winter's tempo. The nursery rang with bell-tinkled giggles as Princess Isolde discovered the miracle of her own hands. Sir Roderick drilled squires in the yard, sword strokes crisp as the wind. Silas, now apprenticed to the city couriers, limped only when he forgot he no longer needed pain to prove purpose. He carried a folded parchment every hour, joking he'd become the whisper steward shadow. I teased that shadows cast longer at low sun and thanked him all the same. Yet the season's stillness proved fertile ground for doubt. One evening, after council dispersed and torches guttered low, I lingered alone in the scriptorium. Parchment towers surrounded me, petitions for millstones, lantern glass, plague cures in far hamlets. So many keys, so many doors. For the first time since Candlemas, I felt small again, a single flicker against a widening dark. What if someday my courage dulled? What if truth forgot my lips? A shuffle broke the hush. The queen, shawl draping her shoulders, stepped from an alcove. She placed a scroll on the desk, wax unsealed. A letter arrived on the coastal tide, she said. Addressed to you. I unrolled it. Magnus' hand, unmistakable, slanted across the page, yet softer now, devoid of venom. Whisper steward. The sea erodes arrogance as surely as stone. I watch gulls drop shells from heights until they open, and I understand what you did to me. You let me break upon my own weight. I offer no plea. But no, I will speak my name upon the charter's parchment when I am ready, and when I do, I will write the truth of my failings, that others bred on iron birthrights may read and turn away from ruin. The letter ended without signature, the serpent crest replaced by a simple, drawn wave. My breath left in a cloud. Not forgiveness, but beginning. Perhaps that was enough. The queen studied my face. You doubt your flame, she guessed. Remember, a candle doesn't conquer darkness by burning hotter, but by lighting other wicks. She produced another scroll, blank save the charter seal at top. Draft the guidelines for choosing assistant stewards. Let new voices carry torches beside yours. Within a fortnight, notices hung in every parish. Call for apprentices to the office of whispers. No lineage required, only clear eyes and steady ink. On appointed day, the palace atrium filled with applicants. Farm girls with rough-cut quills, merchant sons fluent in 3 dialects, an elderly fishmonger who claimed memory sharper than steel. I listened to each, heart swelling like dough beneath warm cloth. By dusk 5 stood selected, Adela the archivist, Jorin the lamplighter, Brother Linus the stammering monk who nonetheless translated grievances into poetry, Etta the street guide able to map alleys from scent alone, and by unanimous vote, Silas, who arrived breathless from a courier run, cheeks wind-flushed and eyes bright with disbelief. I pinned bronze quills to their cloaks. "Welcome," I said, voice steady as falling snow. "Your task isn't to echo me, but to outgrow me. Truth evolves, so must its messengers." Winter's midpoint brought the Festival of Embers, when citizens gather around great braziers to burn dry twigs inscribed with bygone grudges. This year, the assembly moved the festival from the riverside to the palace plaza, an emblem that no hurt lay too low for highest steps to witness. As twilight bloomed lavender, I joined Roderick near a brazier carved with wheat sheaves. He slipped a small twig between fingers, words inked along its grain. I recognized a single line, fear of being less than my oath. We cast our twigs together, sparks lifted like stars relearning flight. Music swelled, drums, lutes, children's reed whistles. Edda guided blindfolded elders to benches warmed by hearthstones. Jorin trimmed lantern wicks. Adela recorded the festival, her notes illuminated by ember glow. Watching them, I felt joy, the fruit, as the queen had named it, ripen within. Sir Roderick cleared his throat. "Rumor runs that spring will bring travels for you, inspecting frontier garrisons, judging storytellers' competitions, negotiating mill levies." He hesitated, then offered a slender key on leather cord. "It opens the new training cell by the east wall. For your practice, or ours, if you like company beyond ink." Warmth spread up my neck. "Keys open doors," I murmured, fastening it beside the signet. "And some doors lead to gardens worth tending." His answering smile held whole seasons. At midnight, the iron sister bell tolled, this time a single, resonant note transforming revel to reverence. The king stepped forth, Princess Isolde cradled against his chest, the queen at his side. Snowflakes melted on torchlit cheeks. He spoke briefly, gratitude, vigilance, hope. Then he turned to me. "Lady Marina," he said, voice carrying through hush, "our realm learned to listen because you dared to speak. Will you offer the closing words?" I swallowed winter air crisp as new parchment and stepped onto the dais. Faces, thousands, tilted to my voice. Bakers smelling of cinnamon, smiths soot-dusted, nobles in velvet, children astride parents' shoulders. I felt no tremor, only belonging. "Friends," I began, "tonight we burn what once bound us, grudges, fears, the lie that a single birthright decides any fate. Tomorrow we wake to blank snow, and our footsteps will write its first story. Let them spell courage. And should another shadow rise, remember not one torch, but many turn night to dawn." I lifted a final twig, blank, symbol of futures unwritten, and cast it to the coals. It flared pure gold, then sighed into crimson embers, bright enough for every watching eye to claim a spark. The plaza erupted, not with roar, but with a shared intake of breath, a single vast heartbeat. Overhead, the night sky mirrored our flames with quiet constellations, as if even old stars sought to learn new patterns penned by humble hands. And I, Marina of the kitchens, whisper steward Valerian, felt the story settle, not as an ending, but as fertile ground where countless voices would soon take root, rising, like bread in warm light, toward horizons we had only just begun to taste.